So in this video we're going to talk about the document object model. We call it the DOM. So we've got this dog image, we're going to be using that later. So what is the DOM? Document object model. We've been spending a lot of time learning about objects in JavaScript. So we've used objects to kind of model the data that we want our programs to manage. But objects can do a lot more than act as just data. In fact, a web page is full of objects when the web page loads, and each one of these objects has properties and methods that we can use to do all sorts of stuff. So when a web page is loaded by the browser, there's a lot of stuff going on. The entire HTML document is parsed, and every single one of the HTML elements on the page are analyzed by the browser. The browser converts each and every HTML element into an object. So as the browser is loading the page, it's creating all these objects out of the HTML tags in the page. And each one of these objects that gets created are used to make up the DOM, the document object model. So this DOM is kind of like a model of the web page that the browser creates, and this model gets stored in the computer's memory and RAM. So the browser parses through all the HTML tags and creates objects for every one of the tags and builds this model that we call the DOM. And these objects that get created, they're a special type of object, and we call them nodes. So a node is an object that represents an HTML element on your page. And each node has a certain set of properties and methods that we can use in our JavaScript code. So I've got this link right here. Let's take a look at this. Here's a page that shows all the properties and methods of these node objects. So I'll open this up here. Now, this is a little bit overwhelming. So if I scroll down here, here's some properties and methods, and I encourage you to take a look at this. But look at all these methods and properties of node objects. And here they're referring to them as elements, but because they're actually representing an element from the HTML page. But in JavaScript, we call them nodes. So look at this. Now there's a lot. So every single node has all these properties and methods. So that gives you an idea of all the things that we can do with these nodes. There's lots of methods we can call and lots of properties we can access. So I'll go ahead and close that. And go back over to the web page here, and so there's actually nodes. There's even more nodes in this DOM than there are HTML elements in a page, because extra nodes get created. For example, there is a node that gets created that represents the window. So you can see here, here's the browser window. I've got my mouse hovering and inside the browser window is our HTML document. So when the DOM is created, this window object gets created, and then within that window object is an object called a document, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the window represents this whole browser window, and it has properties and methods that we can use, and the document object represents the document that's being displayed inside the window. So we get even more nodes in the DOM than there are actual HTML tags on the page, because there's extra stuff that gets created. Okay. So if we want to kind of visualize what we got going on here, I set up this very simple little model to get us started. This would be what we might, if we were going to simulate the DOM in our JavaScript code, it might start to look like this. So what I've got here is a variable called window, and it represents an object. So here's that object, these outer curly braces. So the curly brace here and the curly brace here closes the window object, and inside of it, it has a document property, and that document property is actually storing another object. Now in this example, that object is empty. I just left it that way on purpose, just so we could keep things simple. But in reality, the document object has all sorts of properties, many of which are objects too. So anyways, this is just a really simple way to start to visualize what the DOM looks like and how we might simulate it in a program. We don't need to simulate it because it's there for us, and the browser creates it for us. And by the way, I failed to mention this, but the document object represents our HTML document. So we've got the window object that represents the browser window. That includes all this stuff up here. That's our browser window, including the URL bar. And then it has a property called the document, and the document represents our HTML page, which is what we see here inside the browser window. So it kind of conceptually makes sense. We've got the window object and it contains a document object. So let's expand on this model that we're creating in our JavaScript code here. Let's add some more stuff to it. So in this example here, I've got the same thing as what I had up above, but I've added a few more things to it. First of all, the window object also has a property named location, and the value of that location property is going to be the URL of the HTML page that we're visiting. So if we, in our JavaScript code, if we ever wanted to find out what the URL is for whatever reason, we could use the location property to do that. And then we've got our document object again, but this time I've added some things inside of the document object. So you can see that those are nicely indented like that. So these are indented inside of the document object. Here's the opening curly brace for the document object, and if I drop a line right down, straight down from where that line starts, here's the closing curly brace for the document object. But anyway, so what I've added here, the document object has a property called body, and this represents the body tag or the body element in our HTML page. So, and now the body property contains all of our tags that are in the body of our HTML tag. So you can imagine how many tags we put into an HTML page, and now you can start to understand how complex this DOM, document object model, can be, because what we've got inside the body property is an object for every tag on the page, and that's a big nested conglomeration of objects based on how our tags are nested too. So anyways, we'll get into that a little bit more in a second here. But the other property that I've added, whoops, I'm going to scroll this back here. The other property that I've added to this document object is a method. So this method that exists on the document as a property of the document object is called getElementById. And so I didn't put the code in here for this, but I'll tell you about this in just a second. But first, what I want to do is I want to give you a couple other ways to visualize this DOM. So this is my little simulation of it using JavaScript code, but we'll scroll down the page here, and what we'll see is you can visualize the DOM as a series of containers. So this diagram on the left, we've got the window container, and inside of that container we have the document container. The document container contains an HTML tag, and we kind of skipped over that part, but we also talked about how the document, one of the children of the document is the body. So that's what we just talked about, the body. So you can see here that body and oh wait, how's the setup? So the body and the head are siblings. Anyways, I don't want to get too far off on that stuff, but I think we've talked about children and siblings and parents previously in the course. So you can think of the DOM as a series of containers like this, or you can also think of it as what we call a tree structure here. So these tree documents, I always think they should be turned upside down so that they look like a tree. But what this really is it's the root. So it's what's underground. So that's why it goes down. But anyways, the root starts with the window object. The window object has a document object. The document, or a property that is an object, and it's called the document. And then we've got the HTML starts here, and then we've got the head and the body, and all of these are objects that get created in this DOM, and we can manipulate all these through JavaScript by using the properties and methods of all these nodes. So let's go back and revisit that method, getElementById. So remember, it's a method that exists in this document object. So when we want to use it, we use document.getElementById, just like we did previously when we wanted to call a method on an object. So I've got this code snippet right here, and one way to describe document.getElementById is that it gives us a handle on an element in our web page. So let me explain what that means here. So what this does, document.getElementById returns a node. So it will fetch a node from this DOM and assign it to our variable right here. So this variable contains an object. More specifically, it contains a node object, and once we have a variable that has a handle on an element or a node, then we can start to use its properties and methods. Okay. So this example actually gives us a handle on a very specific element from our web page. And I'll explain how you specify which element to get in a little bit, but the secret is through this parameter that gets passed in. So we'll get to that in just a second, but I want to show you what you can do once you have a handle on an element or a node, however you want to say it. Remember, elements are the HTML, but nodes are part of this object model that gets created, the document object model. So I'm going to scroll on down to this example here, and I'm going to copy all of this and paste it over into Sublime Text. Where's my Sublime Text? There it is. And scroll on down to our script tag. Here it is on around line 200 or so, and I'm going to go ahead and paste in this code and then indent it properly, make everything line up nice and neat. So here's what we've got. So we've already seen this before in the previous code sample. We're just getting a handle on an element in the page, and then so it's in the form of a node object. I know that's a little bit confusing, but remember, HTML is elements. And then the browser creates this model of objects. So what this is, main header is an object, and it happens to be a node object. And node objects have a certain set of properties and methods that we can use. So I've got a variable that's storing that object. So I can go ahead and use dot notation on that object, just like what we've been doing in the past with objects. And in this example, one of the properties of a node is called text content. And what that will give us is that will give us the text that's inside of a tag. So it's the content of the tag. So we're getting that, and I'm just assigning it to a variable here that I call the content. And then in this next example here, what I'm doing is I'm not accessing a property, I'm actually calling a method. So what this does here, so right here, the main header object has a get attribute method, and all nodes have this method. And we'll explain. Oh, what this is doing here is this parameter is saying let's get the ID attribute of whatever element this object is representing. So we know about ID attributes. We know about attributes. I'm not sure if we've actually talked about ID attributes yet at this point. Anyways, we're about to talk more about the ID attribute quite a bit in just a minute, so bear with me here. So what I've got for the last 3 lines here is I'm alerting the content. So remember, that's gonna show the content of the tag that we're pulling out of this DOM, and then I'm alerting this attribute here too. And then here I want to show you what happens when you log a node object, and that might blow you away. So let's go ahead and save this here. I'm going to save it. Go back over to the browser. I am gonna hit refresh first of all. And so what is this here? So remember, we're alerting that content variable, and that content variable we sucked out the content of an element from the page. Whoops, and I need to explain this in a second too, but this is that second alert. So up here, the tag that we're pulling out of our HTML was this one here. It's the H1 tag at the top of the page. So we pulled that out of the DOM. We got a handle on it, and what I mean by that technically is that we assigned this element to a variable. Actually, we assigned this node from the DOM to a variable, and this node represents the H1 tag in our HTML. Okay, so when we alerted the content, that's what it's giving us here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my code, and I'm going to scroll up to that H1 tag in our code. So let's go all the way up to the top of the page where that H1 tag lives, and you can see right here it has an attribute, an ID attribute, and the value of that attribute is set to main-header. Okay, so the second part of that code, that's the second part of the code sample that I showed you, was where we were actually pulling this ID attribute out with that method called getAttribute, and that makes sense. That's named appropriately. It's getting us an attribute. So let's go see how that works. I'm going to scroll back down to our script tag around page or around line 2 something here. Here it is. So for me, I'm on line 206. So here we're calling the getAttribute method of this node that represents that H1 tag, and we're saying which attribute do we want to get, because we know that elements can have more than one attribute. So we're saying give us the ID attribute. So that's what the parameter is for. It's telling this method which attribute we want to retrieve. And so that's what the second alert was down here. So I'm just going to go ahead and refresh the page so we can see that alert again, and we'll see the previous alert also, by the way. So I'm going to go back over to the web page and hit refresh. So here's the first alert, and look at what that's given us right here. That's the content, or the content of that H1 tag. And then if I hit OK here, now remember we fetched the ID attribute. So, and that ID attribute was set to this right here, main-header. Okay, now I'm going to open up the developer tool, so I'll press F12 here, and let's look in the console. And here was that last bit of code in that sample. We did a console.log, and what we passed in as the parameter to console.log was our variable, the variable that contained this object. And look at what it shows us in the log. So we can see right here that that variable contains an H1 tag. Now this is actually an H1 node, remember, because well, anyways, I know that gets confusing, but we can talk about this more in class. But if I go ahead and click on this over here, this is going to show me all of the properties and methods of this single node. So look at, there's so many of them. So every single node in the DOM has all these properties and all these methods that we can use. So it gives us a lot of power to do some really cool things. But what blows my mind, at least, is that every single node in the DOM has all these properties and methods. So think about how many tags you have on an HTML page, and each one of those gets turned into a node in the DOM, and each one of those has all this stuff. So there's just a massive amount of stuff going on in even a simple HTML page. All right, now let's move on to the next section in our page here, and that's right here. So this concept, attributes of elements become properties of nodes. I know I'm kind of using all these terms, elements, nodes, and I know it's a little bit confusing, but what this means is that let's consider an element on our page. So let's just say we have an image tag on our page, and we actually do later on down the page, and you'll use that for your coding problems. But we've got an image tag, and it has some attributes, and look, so it's got an ID attribute, and it has a source attribute, and you should know what the source attribute is by now, because we should have used it in class, and you should also know what the alt attribute is for by now too. So when we pull this out of the DOM, or when we fetch the node that represents this tag in the DOM, these attributes are going to become properties of that node object. So let's see what that code might look like right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this code sample. And by the way, this image tag does exist. I've got an image way down at the bottom. So if you scroll down, you'll see a dog. Let's do that real quick. There he is. So that's our image tag that we're going to work with. So anyways, I'm going to scroll back up here and copy this code snippet. Whoops. And I'm going to go back over to Sublime Text, and I'm going to delete everything that we just had in here. And then I'll go ahead and paste that code snippet in here, and let's see what's going on. Okay, so first of all, we've got a variable. This is our handle on that image tag. So we're reaching into the DOM, and we're using this method, getElementById. And as I think of it, I don't know if I think I skipped over what this method does. We kind of briefly talked about it, but what you do is the parameter that you pass in has to match the ID attribute of the tag that you want to pull out of the DOM. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to our image tag here. So notice that this image tag has an ID of img dog, and so when we pass this in as the parameter to document.getElementById, that's how that method knows which node to return. Okay, so in your HTML, if you want to manipulate a tag or an element, then you might want to give it an ID, and once it has an ID attribute, then you can use document.getElementById to pull it out of the DOM and start doing things with it. Okay. All right, let me go back to Sublime Text here. Okay, so here we're passing in the value of that ID attribute, and that's how it knows which tag to return. In this case, it happens to be an image tag, so it returns an image, I should say node, because technically, remember, tags get converted into node objects, and this method returns a node object. So it's going to return the node object that represents that image tag. So once I've got that node object here, I can use dot notation to access the properties. So look at this. Like I said, the attributes of the tag become the properties of the node object. So I can access the ID like this through dot notation, and the source through dot notation. The source attribute becomes a source property on the object, and the alt attribute on the element becomes an alt property on this node object too. So let me save this real quick here. It is working. Okay. So what did we alerted the? I can't remember exactly what we alerted, but we alerted the ID property, and we alerted the source property, and that's the source property here. And then we also alerted the alt property. So remember, those are properties of the node object. So when a node gets created from an HTML element, the attributes of that HTML element become properties of the node object. Okay, let's move on and let's look at a few more properties and methods that we can work with on these node objects. And a big part of learning JavaScript is learning all about all the properties and methods that you have at your disposal, and there's a lot like we saw. Okay, so this example right here, this variable topics list, let's go ahead and copy this, go over to the browser, go back down to our script tag. Where was that? Line 200 something here. All right, this video is getting a little bit longer than I wanted it to, and I'm getting nervous. So anyways, I'll go ahead and delete what we had. And then fix it. Okay, so what's going on here is we're using this method of the document object. We're passing in the ID of the element that we want to retrieve, and this actually, the UL at the top of the page actually has an ID of this right here, topics list. So again, notice that we pass this in as a string. That's why I have the quotes around there. So it takes that string and it goes through the DOM and looks for the element that has, it looks through all the ID attributes of all the elements, and it finds the one that matches this string right here. So that's why we have the quotes here. So we pass this in as a string. If we didn't have the quotes here, it would think that it would get evaluated as a variable. So it would think that we had a variable called topics list here, and this is actually not even a valid name for a variable because it's got the minus sign in it. So anyways, that's why this is a string here. Okay, anyways, so we're getting a handle on the list that's at the top of the page, and then what we're logging out here is this inner HTML property. So all nodes have this property, and what this will do is this will give us a string of all the tags that are nested inside this list. So remember, you know, a lot HTML tags can contain other tags, and list tags, in this case it's an unordered list, contains li tags. So what this is going to do is this is going to show us all the li tags that are nested within that list. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, go back over to the browser, and by the way, here is that list. So that's it has an ID of topics-lists, and let me just show you that real quick here. So I think we've used the developer tools for this to inspect our HTML, but I just hit F12 to open up the developer tools, and then if I press on this guy right here in the upper left corner of the developer tools, I can click on something and it'll show me the HTML that's being displayed on that spot. So right here you can see that, let me scroll up just a little bit. So here's that UL tag, and you can see that it has an ID attribute of topics list. So, and then if you want to see it in Sublime Text, I'll scroll up to that page, or that part of the page. So here it's on line 18. Now that your line number may be different depending on whether you move that image of the dog around too. So anyways, here it is. It's a UL tag. It has an ID attribute of topics list. So let's see what we get in the console. I'm going to go back to the web page, hit F12, and I'm going to go to the console here and hit refresh, and there you go. So this is giving us the inner HTML property of the UL tag that we have a handle on. Alright, I'm going to close this, and there's just one last thing that I need to show you. I'm going to scroll back down to our last code sample, which is right here. Now what we've done so far is we've just fetched stuff from the DOM, and we haven't changed anything inside the DOM. But we can also, just like we can change properties on regular objects as we've done in the past, we can also reassign values to objects in the DOM. So in this example right here, this is the last code box. I'm going to copy the code in there, go back over to Sublime Text, and scroll back down to our script tag. I'm almost done. Thanks for bearing with me. I try and keep these videos short, but they don't always end up short. So anyways, around line 201 or so is our script tag, and I'll erase what we had before and paste this in, do some formatting, and now let's take a look at this. So I've got a variable that I named intro paragraph, and then I'm getting a handle on the tag in our HTML that has this ID, intro paragraph, and I think that's the first paragraph on the page. I gave it that ID attribute, and then what I'm doing is I'm using dot notation here to reassign a value to this property. So remember, we have the inner HTML property, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a value of this right here. So this is a string, but I do want you to notice that inside that string I've got B tags. So let's see what this does when I reload the page here. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back over to the browser and I'm going to refresh here. But now you have to scroll up to the top of the page to see this, because that paragraph is at the top of the page. So here it is. So it's I don't know if you have your dog image there or not, like I moved it around, but if you look at the first paragraph on the page, you can see that it now displays, it displayed something else before, but now it displays what we did with our code here. So, and you can see this is in bold, just like our B tags are since we use the B tag there. Okay, I gotta end this. This is getting too long. Sorry about that, but this is important stuff. So let me know if you have any questions.